The courtroom fell into a silence so heavy it could be felt. Everyone, the judge, the jury, even the bailiff, stared at the man standing alone at the defense table. His name was Ryan Mitchell, and he had just realized he'd made the biggest mistake of his life. The evidence was stacked high against him, his words were crumbling, and his face was pale with regret. He had chosen to represent himself in court, convinced no one could defend him better than he could. Now, as the prosecutor held up the final piece of evidence, a photograph that sealed his fate, Ryan's hands trembled. His voice cracked as he tried to object, but the judge's stern glare cut him off. "Mr. Mitchell," the judge said coldly, "you've made your argument. Sit down." Ryan's heart pounded. He looked around the courtroom, desperate, as the jury whispered among themselves. He had thought he could outsmart the system. He had thought he could talk his way out. But now, it was too late. As the prosecutor's closing words echoed, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this man's own words have condemned him," Ryan's stomach sank. He realized, in that terrifying moment, that representing himself hadn't just been foolish. It had destroyed him. The courtroom waited for the verdict, and Ryan held his breath. The foreman stood, paper in hand, ready to speak. But before the words came, Ryan's eyes widened in shock. Something unexpected had just happened at the back of the courtroom. And then, the story begins earlier, months before that fateful day. Ryan Mitchell wasn't always standing alone in a courtroom. He was an ambitious, clever man who ran a small construction business in Denver, Colorado. He wasn't rich, but he was proud of what he built. That pride, however, would one day lead to his downfall. It all started with a contract, a big one. A government housing project that could change his life forever. But when unexpected costs piled up, Ryan took shortcuts. He changed materials, moved numbers around, and told himself he'd fix it later. Except later never came. When a part of one of the buildings collapsed, injuring a worker, everything fell apart. The company sued. The state launched an investigation. Ryan panicked. He fired his lawyer after their first meeting, convinced the man didn't believe him. "I can handle this myself," he said. "No one knows my case better than me." His friends begged him not to do it, but Ryan's ego was louder than reason. At first, he prepared like a man possessed. He read every book on law he could find. He spent nights practicing opening statements in front of the mirror. In his mind, he saw himself as a hero, a misunderstood man who would stand tall before the judge and prove his innocence. But the real courtroom wasn't a mirror. It was a battlefield. And Ryan was walking into it without armor. On the first day of trial, he wore a confident smile. But when the prosecutor started questioning witnesses, his smile faded. They had documents, emails, and photographs, things he didn't even know existed. He tried to object but didn't know the right legal words. The judge corrected him in front of everyone. Laughter rippled quietly from the gallery. He felt small. Embarrassed. But he kept pushing, pretending it didn't matter. Day after day, Ryan watched as the case slipped from his control. Witnesses he thought were loyal turned against him. The jury began to look bored when he spoke. He started tripping over his words, forgetting details, and losing his temper. At one point, he slammed his fist on the table, shouting, "They're lying." The judge's gavel came down hard. "One more outburst, Mr. Mitchell, and you'll be held in contempt." From that moment, the tide turned completely. The prosecutor's tone became colder, sharper, cutting him down with every question. Ryan tried to hold his ground, but the walls were closing in. Every mistake, every wrong word, was another nail in his own coffin. Then came the day when the prosecutor revealed something Ryan hadn't expected, a witness who claimed Ryan had offered money to cover up the accident. Ryan's mouth fell open. His heart dropped. He stood up, shaking his head. "That's not true," he yelled. The courtroom buzzed. Reporters scribbled notes. Cameras flashed. Ryan tried to explain, tried to deny, but the damage was done. The jury had seen his anger. The judge had seen his desperation. His confidence, once so strong, had turned to dust. As the witness pointed directly at him and said, "He told me to keep quiet, or else," Ryan's face turned pale. He knew right then that everything was over. He sat back down, his hands trembling, staring at the table as the courtroom murmured around him. And just when he thought things couldn't get worse, the door at the back of the courtroom opened, and someone unexpected walked in. The air went still. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, and every head in the courtroom turned. A woman stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the floor. Ryan froze. His heart stopped. It was Melissa, his former business partner. The same woman who had vanished months earlier when the investigation began. Ryan's throat went dry. He hadn't seen her since the day she walked out of his office, taking a briefcase full of documents with her. Now she was here, wearing a dark blazer, her expression unreadable. The prosecutor smiled faintly, as if this was all part of a carefully planned surprise. "Your Honor," said the prosecutor, "the state calls Melissa Carter to the stand." Ryan's chest tightened. He didn't expect her to testify. Not against him. Melissa took the oath and sat down. Her eyes flicked briefly toward Ryan, but there was no warmth there, only distance. "Ms. Carter," the prosecutor began, "did the defendant ever discuss falsifying safety records on the construction project?" The words hit Ryan like a hammer. His pulse quickened. "Yes," she said quietly. "He told me it was just temporary, that we'd fix the numbers once the inspection passed." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Ryan's jaw clenched. "That's not true," he shouted, standing up again. The judge slammed the gavel. "Mr. Mitchell, sit down or I'll hold you in contempt." Ryan sat, shaking his head, muttering under his breath. He could feel the jury's eyes on him, not with sympathy, but disappointment. He had lost control. Melissa continued calmly. "He said we couldn't afford to lose the contract. He told me to keep quiet if anything went wrong." Ryan's hands balled into fists. He wanted to speak, to tell the truth, his truth, but every time he opened his mouth, the prosecutor was ready with another question, another piece of evidence, another witness statement that twisted everything he'd done. He had thought being his own lawyer meant freedom. Instead, it was a trap he had built for himself. The trial dragged on into the afternoon. The lights in the courtroom buzzed faintly above his head. Papers shuffled, whispers filled the air, and Ryan felt smaller with every passing minute. Finally, the judge looked at the clock and called for closing statements. The prosecutor stood first. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, his voice calm and deliberate, "the defendant chose to represent himself. You've seen his words. You've heard his excuses. But the truth doesn't lie. The documents, the witnesses, and the evidence all point in one direction." He turned toward Ryan and added softly, "He thought he was smarter than the system. But justice is smarter than ego." The jury's eyes flicked between them. Then it was Ryan's turn. He stood slowly, his hands trembling slightly as he faced the 12 strangers who would decide his fate. His voice was hoarse, but he tried to speak with confidence. "Maybe I made mistakes," he began. "Maybe I didn't know the right words to use. But I didn't hurt anyone on purpose. I just wanted to protect what I built." He paused, scanning the faces in front of him. No one moved. "I'm not the monster they say I am," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm just a man who thought he could fix things on his own." The room stayed silent. Even the judge looked down for a moment, his expression unreadable. When Ryan finished, he sat back down, his heart thudding painfully in his chest. That was all he could do. Wait. The jury left the room. Minutes stretched into hours. Ryan stared at the empty jury box, lost in thought. His mind replayed everything, every wrong decision, every proud word, every time someone tried to help and he pushed them away. When the door finally opened and the jury filed back in, Ryan knew what was coming before the foreman even spoke. "We, the jury, find the defendant guilty." The words rang through the courtroom like a gunshot. Ryan's head dropped. His hands went limp. The judge thanked the jury and read the sentencing date, but Ryan barely heard him. It was over. As he was led away in handcuffs, he looked once more at Melissa. For a split second, her face softened, maybe with pity, maybe with guilt. He couldn't tell. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted his name. Cameras flashed. Headlines would soon read, "Man who defended himself in court gets maximum sentence." That night, In the silence of his cell, Ryan sat on the edge of his bunk, staring at the floor. He thought about all the people who told him to hire a lawyer. He thought about the moment he decided he didn't need one. Now, he understood the truth. Representing himself hadn't saved him. It had destroyed him. He whispered to himself in the dark, the echo bouncing off the cold concrete walls. I thought I could win. I really thought I could win. But no one answered. The sound of the cell door locking was the only reply. And from that day on, Ryan Mitchell became a quiet warning, a name lawyers use to remind others of one hard lesson. In court, pride can be the most dangerous sentence of all.